everyone. Welcome to Spirit Switchboard. I'm your host, Carrie Lynn Shellhorn, and you are listening to us live, or not live. This is a pre-record, and I've already started doing it. So this is a pre-record, and you are listening to us on the United Public Radio Network and the UFO Paranormal Radio Network, 107.5 FM in New Orleans and 105.3 in the Gulf Coast. If you are interested in finding out more about all the shows that UPRN has to offer, please head to uprntalkradio.com. You can find out more about our hosts, our shows. There are thousands of archives, and it's not all high strangeness and paranormal. There is something for everyone there. And we're getting a new website. There's going to be a chat room. Apparently, there's going to be a merch store too, which is pretty exciting. With this being a pre-record, it's you guys have already celebrated Christmas if you celebrate the holiday. So I hope that everybody was safe, was warm, has a full and happy heart, and just wanting to send out all of that to you guys. This segment I am so excited about today's segment. It's Christmas 2 weeks, 3 weeks early for me. It was Christmas when this book arrived for me. Honestly. So I'm going to bring our guest out. Troy Taylor is a supernatural historian, paranormal investigator, and best-selling author of more than 150 books on history, hauntings, true crime, the unexplained, and the supernatural in America. He is the founder of American Hauntings Ink, a company dedicated to haunted history, tours, ghost events, books, and the long-running Haunted America Conference. Through American Hauntings Ink and the American Hauntings Podcast, Troy has spent over 3 decades preserving eerie folklore, documenting real-life ghost stories, and exploring the darker corners of American history. Tonight, we're going to explore seances, spirit packs, and mediumship scandals. We're talking magic, fraud, faith, and the afterlife with Troy Taylor and his new book, The Man from Beyond, Houdini Among the Spirits. Hi, Troy.
Hey, how are you?
I'm great. How about you?
Good. I'm good.
Okay, before we even start talking about Houdini, I want to talk about something that brought me a lot of joy, almost as much as this book. So I am going to bring this up, see if we can bring it up really quickly. Thanks for being patient.
Sure. I'm on pins and needles. I don't know what you're going to hit me with here. So.
Oh, just wait.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that was my snow day picture since we got snowed out on Small Business Saturday at the end of November. So, yeah.
You had a couple of snow days, right? Like you had to reschedule more than once.
Yeah,
but this is so joyful. Everything about this is joy. It is like joy coming off the page. I just love it so much. And I think too many people forget about having a sense of play and going with the flow and, all of that good stuff. But it was just so much fun. So I wanted to thank you for posting that. Mm-hmm.
Oh, sure. Well, I wasn't doing anything else that day, as it turned out. So,
Oh, let's see if we can pull it back down. There we go. So much fun. We're just getting, I'm in Guelph outside of Toronto, Canada. So we're just starting to get our snow.
Well, we don't usually get that much here. I'm right outside of St. Louis. So usually here on the river, the Alton is where I live, Alton, Illinois, and we're a river town, and we're down in the kind of the valley there. So a lot of it skips us, but not this time. So of course,
we kind of are in a pocket as well too. We're in this little pocket where we don't get as much as everyone around us. But, there's no hill where I can tromp out and get.
We've got plenty of hills here. So it's a whole town built on bluffs. So we're we always joke about how we don't have right or left turns here. We only have uphill and downhill turns,
Oh
which
my
is
gosh, that's
pretty
fun.
accurate. So yeah.
That is pretty fun. I'm going to bring this up for us as well too. So you had made a social media post, promoting that the book was going to be coming out and people could get autographed copies, which I have to say thank you for that as well too, because shipping to Canada's, costs more than the book probably. So
yeah, it does. It does.
So I appreciate it, and I can't
I'm just
tell
glad
you
it
how
gets there. Our post office is not the best, so I'm just happy it makes it. So
yeah, and it did. And our post, Canada Post has gone on strike twice, and for a lengthy period of time too, which kind of messed everything up. But I got it, so I squealed when I saw the post because it was everything that I am obsessed about. And then I was so excited when it finally came. And we have porch pirates pretty bad where I live.
Oh,
so
really?
I was
No, yeah.
Oh yeah. I was watching to make
sure. Yeah, right.
Hands off the book. So yeah, it's and it's so like having the pictures in it, which there's one that I want to talk to you about once we get going. I just am so excited about it. Everybody who knows me, when I said, okay, folks, Troy Taylor wrote a book about Houdini, and they always like, because when I started doing the seances, even every time I take out my spirit board, it's like, okay, Houdini, come on.
Yeah.
Like we all want Houdini. So why do you
I've been doing
like
those Houdini seances for we've been doing them on Halloween. I usually do it when it falls on a weekend, Thursday, Friday, or Saturday. Otherwise, people aren't going to come on a Tuesday, But I've been doing them since the mid '90s, and no, he's never shown up. I mean,
for me either.
Things have happened, but never Houdini. So
no, not for me either. And to be honest, even if he had, I don't know if I would talk about it publicly.
Well, that's probably a good idea. I
wouldn't talk about it publicly. There's definitely we've had some interesting things happen, and definitely celebrities show up potentially,
Sure.
But I don't necessarily talk about too much of that out loud. But the people who are here experiencing it all have great stories to tell.
Yeah.
So why do you think that we are still so fascinated with Houdini? Like, what is it about him that still draws us to his story?
Well, I think that, when you say magic or magician, most people these days especially couldn't name more than a couple anyway, but they'll all can name Houdini. Everybody knows Houdini. I think probably the reason why is he was one of the very first real American big celebrities. We'd had actors and things that were popular. Going back, to the days of John Wilkes Booth and his brother, they were well-known actors, but they were actors. So you had to have a very specific interest in the Booths or, Sarah Bernhardt or Jenny Lind. These were people that were huge in the 19th century, but, in those days before there was a lot of media and not a lot of photographs that would appear in newspapers and things, by the time Houdini came around at the turn of the last century, it was a lot easier to publicize people. Obviously social media didn't exist, but the newspapers did. And he knew how to get publicity. This was a guy who was a genius at marketing himself because he had this massive ego for good reason. The guy was good at what he did, but a lot of what he did was built on his own. Well, it's no different than today. We have people that are famous for being famous. Essentially that's what Houdini was doing with himself, except he had a talent to back it up. And the things that he did made news because they seemed so incredible. And so it made him this massive celebrity that people across the country, no matter how rich, how poor, recognized him from his photographs, from the paintings, the posters, and he just mass marketed himself the way that the circuses were starting to do at that same time. So this was something that appealed to people, and everybody in a day when, movies would get started during his career, but not at the beginning of his career. There was, of course, no television, no anything like that. So for entertainment, people went to vaudeville theaters. The rich went to the opera, the common people went to the theater. They went to see the vaudeville shows. And, between the singing and the dancing and Houdini on stage, well, there was no competition there. And he turned himself into not only one of our great celebrities, but also, and I've heard some people refer to him as one of America's first superheroes because of the things that he did, seemed impossible to ordinary people. And for most ordinary people, they were impossible. I mean, everything was a trick. I mean, everything was an illusion. I mean, he was the first to cop to that. I taught myself to do this, when he magically escaped from a box. Well, he had, dozens of keys that he'd had made. And oftentimes Bess would slip him a key with her tongue when she'd give him a kiss, and so no matter how well they searched him, he always had a way out. But even so, there was a lot of skill there, because some of the tricks like metamorphosis that he used to do with his brother and he ended up doing with his wife, that was done in a matter of seconds. Now, how, and again, I'm not sure how he managed to do all of it. I mean, some of his stuff has become well known as to how he achieved it, but some of that stuff, getting out of some of the things he got out of, pretty amazing. And the fact that people would sit for an hour in a theater waiting for him to get out of an underwater torture cell that he was hanging upside down in. The fact that people would sit for an hour, can you imagine that today? Nobody would do that, sitting there staring at a curtain, knowing he's inside, but they're not going to wait. No one had the patience for that these days. But back then, man, that was pure entertainment, and it just built up his story even more.
And it's the draw, like his physique and his dedication, his focus and drive, like both men and women, very drawn to him for different reasons, right? And the story that he created, for sure. So you've written about him before. So why, what drew you to come back to and revisit this?
I felt like that I've written about him in several different books. I've told short versions of his story, but the fact that I guess I've never lost my interest. I mean, as a kid, I loved all that stuff. I loved the magic shows and magic stuff, and I always had a thing for Houdini. I've got a huge collection of the stuff. And so I've always had a thing about it, and I've always been an admirer of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. And I knew about their friendship, and I knew how it got ruined. And I think that it was a case of, which we can get to all that. But I think I came back to it just because I felt like that people don't remember some of this stuff. They don't know, maybe they don't know about it at all. And for instance, before we even went on the air, you and I had both mentioned Marjorie Crandon, which would be his, big adversary, sort of, a friendly adversary. But how many people, if you went out on the street today and asked 10 people if they knew who she was, I can guarantee you that probably 9 would have no idea who you were talking about. Yeah. And this is an amazing time period. And I feel like we're sort of revisiting that, it's the 2020s, and we're all looking back at what happened before. And I think that started with the pandemic. I think we all started looking back to how history was repeating itself, with, the 1918 Spanish influenza, there were so many things about that and our pandemic that were so similar that we got caught up in the 2020s. We got caught up in the roaring 20s of the 1920s. Started talking about gangsters again. We started talking about, the real heyday of spiritualism, or maybe the second heyday of spiritualism, popping back after World War I and all of that death. And Houdini just kind of was a natural thing for me. Plus, I mostly don't live in this time era anyway. I mean, everything I write about is old, and that's and so it's just, it fascinates me. And I felt like that, talking about Houdini again, especially as we're coming up on the centennial next year of his death, I feel like that, it's something that we, are just going to continue to talk about. Plus, I just am fanatical about Houdini anyway. In my museum, I've got an entire case dedicated to, the magicians and the spiritualists and the combination of the two, and a big section on Houdini and Conan Doyle. I make them share this big shelf in the cabinet next to each other. I feel like that, maybe they'll patch things up. So
play nice in the sandbox.
Yeah.
But you explore his early years when he dabbled in being a fake medium,
being
right?
being a spiritualist medium,
before he became that very loud critic of it. So how did those behind the curtain experience shape that relentless debunker that he became?
Yeah, well, and that's the thing. We think of him, and listen, the debunker people, the skeptic people, love to claim him as one of their own. And in a way, I can see their point if they were doing what he was doing. The difference is that Houdini was a real skeptic. He was someone who wanted some proof. He wanted evidence. He didn't say, I don't believe it because I don't believe in it, like modern skeptics do. Oh, I don't believe in that. It can't be real. He wanted it desperately to be real. I mean, desperately. Yes, he had dabbled in being a fake medium, but that was always part of the show. That was a show that he was doing as part of the circus. And then after his mother died, he always had an interest in it. He had a huge collection in spiritualism and magic and the supernatural. And that was always part of his interests. And after his mother passed away, he desperately wanted to talk to her because he was, he was like the mama boy of all mama boys. I mean, like a step down from Norman Bates here. I mean, it's,
sweetheart.
Yes. I mean, he was really dedicated to his mother. And, and he always said that her death was something he wasn't sure he'd ever recover from. And I don't really think he ever did. Not completely. But he really wanted to talk to her. And then as he tried to do it, he kept finding people that he knew were frauds. I mean, he knew the tricks. He knew how things were done. He'd been a stage magician for years, so he could see how they were manipulating and taking advantage of people. And I don't think that all mediums and spiritualists were out to defraud people. I just think that there were a lot of people who it's no different. Again, we can say the same parallels today. I don't think that everybody who was involved in the paranormal is trying to, mess with somebody. I mean, but you can't criticize everyone in the paranormal by a dumb television show that you watched. You just can't, and I think this was the same kind of thing. I think lost patience with looking to find someone who was genuine. And that was one of the things that attracted him to Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the creator of Sherlock Holmes, for those who don't know, is that he and his wife were so sincere. And I truly believe they were sincere. And I believe that they weren't doing anything to try and fool him. But I think that by that time, he was a couple of years into his crusade against spiritualists by then. But I don't think he ever gave up. I mean, he always had that pact of if I die, I'm going to do my best to make contact with, Joe Dunninger and some of his other magician friends, as well as his wife. If I can do it, if it can be done, I will do it.
So I have a question about that. We're going to build up to that.
Okay,
and you kind of answered my next question, actually.
Okay.
I quite like his deep hope to connect with his mom and like his mother in spirit versus his crusade, right? To explore or expose fraudulent mediums. Like, and I would say like he was an open-minded skeptic. That's how I.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think he was too. So, and continued to keep looking.
Yeah.
Even as he was, I think that in a lot of cases, I mean, I'm sure he got a lot of tips from people, and he had the investigators who worked for him and things that would go into seances. He would go in disguise, and things. And I think that he always went with, unless he'd had a tip that somebody was a fake and they needed to be called out. I think when he found someone new, I think he probably always went into that with a kernel of hope that maybe this is the real one, but I think also he got fooled so many times that the way I always phrase it is that he went looking for revenge. Out of anger, he went after everyone that he possibly could and tried to expose.
What does it say about grief and belief and skepticism?
Well, I think that, it's true. I think that his grief was taken advantage of by people so many times that it turned to anger. I really do believe that's what happened. And so his skepticism became so much greater. I don't think he ever gave up hope, but I don't think that he really thought he was going to find anything. I really don't. And so it became a lot easier to criticize all of it. Right. Because even as Conan Doyle would say, just because you can prove that this could be done on stage doesn't mean that it always is. And I find that in a lot of cases. I mean, I'll just be writing about a place that is said to be haunted, and maybe I'll find a reason why one part of it isn't true. I mean, for instance, and I won't go off onto a big tangent here, but for instance, for years people have considered the Myrtles Plantation in Louisiana to be one of the most haunted places in America, and I've never said it wasn't, but I will say it's not haunted for the reason that's been publicized. Chloe never existed, so it's a case of, I could have looked at that and said, so this is all crap. There's nothing about this place that's real because this story isn't true. I've proven she didn't exist. I've proven these people were not poisoned. They died a year apart. Here's their death records. They died from smallpox. None of this stuff ever happened. But that's not the case, because people have had experiences there. And even when they've involved a young African-American woman, there was a story that dated back long before this whole Chloe thing got made up. So my thought is always, listen, I'm not saying the place isn't haunted. There have been 10 documented murders that happened in this house. So it's got the potential to be haunted. So I'm not saying that your experiences aren't real. I'm saying that you're choosing the wrong ghost, so to speak, that's haunting this place, because this one isn't real. So it's not to say that, none of the spiritualists or none of the mediums that were out there were not genuine. I think there were genuine, but I also think the frauds ruined it for everybody, because this is how it always works. It always takes just one person to ruin it for everybody. And in this case, it was
at
a lot
that
of
time
people. Yeah.
At that time, the income bracket that those people were in, and in creating an income for themselves, they had to come up with the next way to entice somebody into their
right.
Yeah,
your tricks, you couldn't knock on tables anymore. By the 1870s, you had to really be putting out some really exciting stuff. And the pressure that was on a lot of those people, even the genuine ones, even the ones who no trickery had been found, nobody could prove they were doing anything. And then one thing would happen and they would get caught, and it would ruin them forever. Yeah. And I think that in a lot of those cases that there were people who were the real thing that got painted with the brush that said they weren't, because they got caught cheating. And, not to say that it was okay to cheat, but it happened because the pressure that was on these people to perform, and that also takes us back to, even the early days of spiritualism. So many of the mediums who exploded into the public eye after the Fox sisters and things, and in the wake of all that, so many of them were women who I would give a pass to. If they got caught cheating, I'd give them a pass, because these were women who changed everything we know about feminine history. For the first time, women had jobs. They were at the forefront of an American movement that millions of people were. People are like, well, what's this? It's so old and dusty, old fashioned. I'm like, look, when America's population was like 10 million people, there were between 3 and 4 million people who were going to seances on a weekly basis, who were believers in spiritualism. So for the first time, women had a voice. And they, even if it was a voice in the seance room and not in the public forum, it was still a voice. And they had their own jobs and they had their own income. And this was a time when women were considered property of their husbands. They couldn't have a bank account. They couldn't sign legal papers. They couldn't vote, obviously. They couldn't be on a jury. None of that would change until about 1920, not in America anyway. And so you had, a lot of people who were coming into this and were doing what they could to try to make a living for themselves. And is it fair to say that they were taking advantage of people? Okay, that puts us in a sticky situation. But I think that a lot of them came into it with a very sincere attitude and with the belief that they really were psychic mediums. And a lot of them were. There are so many, I think, probably genuine mediums that have been completely forgotten, because we don't have records of them. Who do we have records of? The famous ones who got caught. They're the ones that we all know about. They're the Florence Cooks, the people who we realize they got caught cheating, so now we know who they are. But what about all those women who were the real thing that are barely a footnote? And listen, I'm just as guilty because I can't find records on these people. I can find them in old newspaper archives and they're impressing people, but their names just didn't stick around. It's like, silent movie actors,
Right.
So many of them were huge stars, but what about the thousands of others that were great, that people loved, but they've just disappeared over time? And it's the same thing with these mediums. So I probably just jumped ahead 12 questions. I'm sorry, but
you've done pretty
wind
good.
me up and get me going, and that's where you are. So
I'm all about evidential as well too. So a while ago, I'd say shush with love. So it became a hashtag. It became swag. Don't tell me too much so I don't get called out for being a cheater, kind of stuff. But it's so true. And at that point in time, like the child mortality rate was high. There were all of the millions of deaths from the wars. There was so many people needing hope. And if the president's wives were hosting, because there was two, if it's happening in the White House, it can happen in our parlor.
And there were quite a few who were interested in anything to do with the supernatural. And as you said, at least two presidents' wives who had seances in the White House. The thing about that is that it's so interesting to look back and see how widely accepted that things were, that without a second thought, until people started to get called out about it. And then things changed, which is too bad, because I think that things could have been a lot different if it had been handled differently, if that makes sense. Some of the investigations and things that took place were done the same way a lot of skeptical investigations take place now. Oh, I don't believe in it, so it can't be real, and that's unfortunate, because I think that, people had a need for spirit mediums at that time, because like you said, the death rate, the child mortality rate, a lot of these mediums became therapists before therapists existed. People came because they wanted somebody to talk to about their loss, their grief. And this was a way for people to cope at a time when there was no other way to cope. It's not like you can, take some kind of medication. Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah,
they left and didn't come back.
Right. Right.
A lot of husbands, brothers, sons, left and never came back. So just
it wasn't like now. Sure, you might get a letter from the front line somewhere, months in the future when your husband, uncle, son, nephew, cousin was dead.
Right.
You might show up, and it wasn't that much different even by the teens. We were talking about still no way to really communicate with people. I mean, yes, there were telephones, but if you're on a battlefield in France, who are you going to call? There's no way to call anyone. So people were going away and, just like you said, never coming back. And that, that's tough to handle, for anybody. So
of all the seances and experiments that Houdini participated in attempts to connect with his mother, which is there one that stands out as the most heartbreaking or revealing about who Houdini was outside of his stage persona,
Well, I mean,
in your opinion?
yeah, a lot of the records that he kept from those seances were mostly, I went and found this. But I think that the one that he did with the Doyles was the one that was probably the worst of all of them, even though, it was done with great intentions. And by then their relationship was a bit rocky, but not completely gone yet. This was kind of what killed it. Is they got together in Atlantic City in 1922, and Lady Jean had developed, she believed, a gift for automatic writing. Sir Arthur had never claimed to be a medium or anything like that. He just was a devout believer in it. And they'd had a young woman who had been staying with them who came up with some really compelling evidence as far as he was concerned. And that's kind of what turned him around about it. But he had offered Houdini that they would try and contact his mother. And coincidentally, unknown to the Doyles, it was Cecilia's birthday that day. And so when Houdini went up to their hotel suite for this automatic writing session, and it began, and again, he believed the Doyles were sincere, but began to believe they were delusional, that they were fooling themselves, because she came up with this message, this really gushing message from Cecilia to her son. But there were problems, a lot of problems. And Houdini immediately noticed that, for one thing, his mother didn't barely spoke English, didn't write English. Here was a message coming through. There had been a cross that had been put at the top of the paper. His mother was Jewish. Houdini considered his mother's birthday pretty much a national holiday because mother-son thing there. And it was never mentioned. And so he had a lot of problems with this. I mean, of course, the Doyles had explanations for all that, but it was just too much for Houdini to accept. And I think that whole thing was, I think, really heartbreaking for both men, because they had a good friendship, even though it was, playfully antagonistic. Both of them like to discuss, they like to debate their sides. And it had never turned into anger up until this point. But now Houdini had become angry, and they did try a couple of times to kind of patch things up. But, I think it was the Marjorie incident that really
was that's my next question.
The last nail in the coffin. Yeah.
That was my next question. And Sir Arthur Conan Doyle played a hand in that as well too, right?
Yeah.
So
in the newspapers, kind of like it was like a Twitter battle today. These guys going back and forth. It was just in the newspapers at the time about these two going back and forth with each other over the genuineness of things. So.
Didn't it not start? So Scientific Americana had a contest, and there's some prize money to be won. And do you want to take it from there?
Yeah. I think by the time the contest began, this was something that I think by this time Houdini was, I want to say, pretty worn down. I mean, he was he was traveling all the time. He was constantly on tour. He's trying to make movies, all of which are pretty bad. I don't know if you've seen any of them, but they're not great. But he was trading on his fame, so it made money. Yeah. Even if it was just him doing a bunch of different escape tricks, that's the entire film. That's the plot. So I think he was pretty worn down by things. So when he had met with the publisher at Scientific American, and he had offered to put Houdini, he told him what he wanted to do, and Houdini agreed with it. He thought it was a great idea. And he put him on the panel, along with a couple of scientists, a couple of guys who were interested in spiritualism, and then J. Malcolm Bird, who was an editor at Scientific American. And he
plays a big part in the Marjorie story.
Yes, he did too, because he was more of a believer. and had a lot of tie-ins to like the American Society for Psychical Research and things. So he was kind of mixed up in the whole field. So he wasn't exactly and neither was Houdini for that matter, but he wasn't exactly, a impartial, part of this. And Houdini was really there, I think, by this time in his career, was there to just pretty much debunk whoever they came up with, which is what he did. Every time he would be involved in one of these sittings, he would find trickery of some kind, and he would always prove it. So, I mean, he was, and listen, I've got to tell you, I admire some of these guys. The balls on some of these people to show up and perform knowing they were going to be performing tricks and think they weren't going to get caught.
Yeah,
that is impressive, yes, or delusional, one or the other. Because it was probably a case of where some people thought they could get away with it, and some of them probably thought they were really the real thing. In their head, they convinced themselves they were real. And
gives them a few moments of fame, though.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. They got their names in Scientific American, which is funny to think about how this was a science magazine. And this is what was in every issue back then, because that's how, again, this is one of those things that people can't wrap their heads around. In the early 1920s, this stuff was everywhere. I've been working on, I've been collecting all these old, like, weird Ouija board stories from the newspapers, and there's thousands of them every year in every paper, and it's, people just can't understand how things were back then. But anyway, back to our story.
Crazy Victorian times, right?
Yeah. So
right after
Houdini, here's that. So then they start running some of these. He's out on tour. So my guess is that Malcolm Bird is thinking, hey, I'm going to jam a few of these people through because I think they're the real thing. I don't like Houdini. I don't need him around. And then he ends up in Boston with Mina Crandon, who would start using the name Marjorie as because her story started before all this. She got into the wave of spiritualism, and I really think that it was more her husband, and I talk about this in the book, it was more her husband wanting to turn her into something than she was. She was the epitome of the 1920s flapper. I mean, she, she's a terrible mother, divorced, which at that time was scandalous, lousy mother, liked to go out drinking, dancing, and just, it was just a kind of a married to this rich doctor and was just living it up. And
Canadian.
Yeah. And, he got interested in spiritualism and kind of pushed her into it. And then they ended up with, all these cronies, these sycophants who would come around and swear she was genuine, who all end up playing parts in the story too, like her dentist, which we can get into that in a minute. But so Malcolm Bird ends up at, these seances with Marjorie in Boston. And that's how she ends up with this pseudonym, so he can write about her because, he's this respected doctor and he doesn't want his name, at least at first, in the papers. But then I think he starts eating it up too later on. But anyway, they start bringing in investigators who were mostly just a bunch of flunkies who were like Malcolm Bird, that were, convinced already when they got there. And they're hanging out in the Crandon's house, and they're partying with them. They're drinking with them. They're having dinner with them every night. They're sleeping over. Guys are borrowing money from the doctor. He's like, oh, I'll get you all set up with your institute here. I mean, you could just see all this happening. And, so they're like, oh, well, she is the real thing. And everybody's writing it up. And so they finally, this goes on for a bit, and Bird is like, okay, well, she's the real thing. We're going to give her the prize. Well, Houdini knows nothing about what's going on. He sees the news in the newspaper that they're just about to award this, and he becomes unhinged at this point. Now, I think this had less to do with him not believing that Marjorie, was the real thing. I think it had more to do with his ego. The fact that they would dare to embark on these investigations without him and would name someone as a winner without him. Just that could not happen.
Yeah.
And listen, he was one of the biggest celebrities in the world at the time. So the fact that they had purposely left him out of this, I could see where it would irritate him. I get it. I do get it. But I also think he came into this with, I'm gonna show you,
Well, and then why bring him on if they're not going to include him at the end?
Exactly.
Like,
exactly.
you would want a piece of that moment.
Right. So when he got involved in it, and when he finally shows up, and immediately after his first night there, he's like, I know how she's doing all of it. I'm gonna expose her as a fraud, and so he's already convinced. But what's so interesting about it is that that whole thing has been painted as if these two got together, they hated each other, and they were immediately trying to ruin the other one. That is not the case. This was an adversary relationship only when it came to the seances. Outside of that, they really got along well.
Yeah.
He was nicer to her than most people were. She really liked him, and he liked her. And he would, when the show was, when they weren't on stage, so to speak, they were friends. It's like, football players beating the hell out of each other for, 4 quarters. And then at the end of the game, they're hanging out chatting because the guys know each other. And that's kind of how this was too. And so, she got her feelings hurt several times because of things he said in the newspaper. And it was always like, well, it's the newspaper. I was probably misquoted. And if I wasn't, that's what I've got to say, because I don't think this is real, but I think you're swell. It was kind of that, but she's an interesting character. I mean, there's no doubt about it. She definitely brought a whole new vibe to spiritualism in the 1920s. I wonder how many people were imitating her at the time. I've never really seen any data or record on that, but I'm sure there were others, because word did leak out of the way that she would conduct her, seances in the nude and, and answer the door in a filmy nightgown. Very distracting, which is what happened with, all of these guys that Malcolm Bird brought in. They got very distracted by this cute flapper who was doing seances, because let's be honest, if you take a look at some of the other spirit mediums of the time period, usually a bunch of old ladies, and it's always the ones we remember. It's the cute Florence Cooks, who show up as Katie King. Oh yeah, no, that's definitely not the same girl. Are you blind? It's obviously the same woman, and then
it's so manipulative.
But it's so that she knew how to distract people the same way that Marjorie did. And Marjorie would keep up the distractions, and she would. And I also think that if she got into a jam, and listen, I'm not going to say she had no spiritualist powers. I'm not saying she didn't manifest some abilities. I just think that it was a lot easier, and that's what she was all about. The easy way, the easy road, the good times, the fun. I think it was a lot easier for her to entertain her clients with a little help from her husband or some of the other, people that were part of their inner circle that would help out with some of this stuff. I really do. And I think that when Houdini showed up, suddenly, there's very little activity that's taking place when Houdini is there during those seances, the official ones. When he just showed up, of course, Walter, the spirit guide or dead brother, would show up and badmouth Houdini and call him names and all kinds of stuff. But that was all part of the entertainment. That was part of the show. And I don't know that Houdini ever gave that much serious thought, but he was looking for the tricks, the things that she was supposed to be able to do, like ring the bells and things. And then she couldn't, because I think maybe two reasons. There's two possibilities. One, she knew that if she and her circle did their usual stuff that they would do, whenever they just had a client or one of the investigators from Harvard or something there that became believers, they could get away with a lot. in a pitch dark room. You can do a lot of things in there. But I think they knew that Houdini would catch that stuff. So she got stage fright and it didn't happen. The other possibility, the other side of the coin, is that she was the real thing, but was so nervous with Houdini there that she couldn't perform. So I think there's a couple of ways that you can look at it. Do I think she had maybe some abilities? Sure, maybe, because I've heard some interesting accounts from people, but I also think that she often got a lot of help from her husband and her friends. And I think that continued
entertainment.
On.
Is it entertainment or is it?
Well, it's entertainment for the people that come to see it. And I think that with her friends, I think some of her friends were true believers. I really do, because I think there had been times when she had impressed them enough that they thought she was the real thing. And then by them being recruited to do something to kind of spice up the seance, they were just helping the spirits.
And they spiced them up.
Right. That they weren't really doing anything wrong. They were just helping get things going. I think that was probably a mindset that a lot of them have. And that's the same kind of stuff that, I've caught people doing that. I'm trying to figure out how do I not name any names? I had been involved in this radio show. Then they would do like every Halloween they would do, or the Halloween season, they would do a show with some of their listeners that they had to last out, the night or an hour or whatever in certain places. And I had worked with them a couple of times and vouched for the credibility of what they were doing. And then the third time I went to work with them, the producer had changed. So they had a different producer who was not really that interested in keeping things on the level, and caught them in a location tossing rocks. We saw it. I mean, saw it happen. And then I refused to ever work with them again because I don't need that, And so I know that it's easy for people to do because they want to make sure that people are interested and engaged and entertained. But on the other hand, when you bring in someone like Houdini, who's going to really roast you if he finds out you're cheating, that's really taking a risk. And so because of that, nothing happens. Hardly anything happens during the seances because it was just some really basic stuff. And, of course, then there was the controversy over the bell in the box and whether or not Houdini had rigged it so it wouldn't ring, or if, where that ruler came from, that folding ruler, was it, where did it come from? Who did it? And I think because of that, it kind of bit him in the butt too. And so they ended up with a standoff. They ended up with a draw by the time this thing was over. And of course, by then the newspapers and everybody had said, oh, well, Marjorie's fooled Houdini, or she's bested Houdini. And, Houdini's like, yeah, I did, nothing happened. What am I supposed to do? So I don't know.
It's hard. I did a huge event at a theater. When I went to check it out, their green room was the size of a closet.
Oh, yeah.
The green room was the size of a small closet, and the theater is closed now. But in that closet, there was mirrors on every wall facing in.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
All right.
So when I walked in, I was like, "Oh, okay, here we go." So I have an idea for an event. Let's give it a go. So, why don't we project me in here onto the big theater wall?
Right.
We'll do some scrying, and we are going to project for people to watch. And I that's when I talked about Marjorie. I talked about Houdini. I gave this whole talk, and we did everything kind of that way. Trans-channeling, did all of this stuff. So the people who got it, I promoted it. This is not staged. We're doing it in October, but there's not going to be jump scares. There's not going to be, so you need to understand that this is how this is going to roll. So the people who were interested got it and understood what was happening, right? There for the history and learn. And those who were there for the jump scares were smoking pot, drinking, going to the concession to drink. So, to try to do it traditionally, you have to have that interest. And if we're not doing that kind of like Penn and Teller smoke and mirrors to draw that attention, it's not going to hold people's attention. So no different than back then, right? And I loved Houdini's drive to create the debunking tools.
The box that he made to put her in, which was, you look at that thing and you see him in it, you see her in it, some of the photographs, and you're like, how would anyone do anything in that? It is like a terrifying thing, especially because, all of the stories were, that she could manifest ectoplasm from various orifices. And because she couldn't really do that while sitting in that box, there was an argument about, do we put in a screen? Do we put in what do we do here? And so I think that really, even if, let's just say, that she had been absolutely genuine and the conditions that he put her under to do this, there's no way she could have performed. Not the way that she normally did, whether she was engaging in trickery or not. How in the world are you going to do anything in that box? So, he was convinced that, and I think that he had some really valid theories on how she did accomplish some of the stuff she was doing, because he did catch her with her feet out, and using her feet and putting that spirit horn on her head, which is a hilarious cartoon. If you've ever seen the illustrations of that, he put together that little booklet about the secrets of Marjorie, and there's these really funny illustrations in it, and there's one of her wearing that spirit horn on her head, and I still laugh when I look at it. I've seen it 100 times and it's still funny, but it does make sense, because these are all things that if he was doing what she was doing, he knew how he would do it. But see, again, that gets back into that whole thing of, just because you can duplicate it on stage doesn't mean that it doesn't ever happen. I mean, just because we can we can make a ghost appear in a house, just using technology, it doesn't mean that there aren't ghosts that don't show up in people's houses. So you have to be careful with, but he didn't care about that. I mean, he was in it for the publicity the same way that she was. And so it was all about just making sure that his name was still out there and that he was doing the things that he was supposed to be doing, which was debunking mediums. And so Marjorie just happened to be a very high profile target. She had made a name for herself. She had gained her own fame, and Houdini, who also had his own fame. And listen, I admire the man. Don't get me wrong. I do. But I also see what a massive ego narcissist he was too. I get it, and I think to become as famous as he became, he kind of had to be. I think that's something that if you're not a crazed narcissist, you're never going to be a big celebrity. And we can look at a list. We can sit here in front of each other and name 20 celebrities. And I guarantee you that every time we named one, a therapist or a psychologist would go, yeah, they're a narcissist, because you have to be able to promote yourself that way. And that's tough for a lot of people. It is relevant. Tough. Yeah. Having to stay relevant. Exactly. And that's a perfect way to put it. He needed to stay relevant with what he was doing. And I think that exposing her was imperative for his career. And, I think that everyone involved was disappointed when it ended, because Marjorie never really got to perform the way that she wanted to. And Houdini could never really rake her over the coals the way he wanted to. I think that he wanted this massive expose, and it just didn't happen. The whole thing didn't end with a bang. It ended up with a whisper, and then it was over and everybody moved on. Houdini continued his career, and, yes, he put out that little booklet, but that's about as deep as he ever got into it. And Marjorie just moved on. She still had her fans. She still had her people around for a while. I think her demise really came not because of anything that she did, although, there were the fingerprints that her spirit guide brother supposedly left in the wax that were fingerprints of her dentist. And, there was some issues, because I think at that point, her drinking had gotten the better of her.
Yes.
Her marital problems. I mean, because listen, that guy was a piece of work. Her husband was a piece of work. And so, her marriage is falling apart. She's drinking. She's depressed. She's having trouble paying her bills because an interest in spiritualism had started to fade. By the time her career came to an end, she didn't have many people left other than her really close devotees, and they would let her do anything she wanted. But, I will give her one thing. On her deathbed, she refused to ever say that she cheated. She never would admit anything. She went to her grave saying, it was real. You'll have to decide for yourself. So I'll at least give her that. Because I think that toward the end, I think she was really faking a lot of things. Just because I think her abilities, whatever abilities that she had, and maybe they were minor, maybe they were really small things, but whatever it was she had, I think that her depression, her drinking, and everything else, I think that stuff was pretty much gone. All she had left was her little bit of celebrity that was now fading also. So
I met a shaman from Northern Ontario. I'm from Northern Ontario. Okay. And just when I was stepping into doing this publicly full time, he said to me, you need to be very mindful of your journey. He said, because mediums all end up, if they're not careful, as alcoholics. He's like, yeah,
I could see that really, because dealing with the kind of stuff you have to deal with, I think a lot of times if you can't turn it off and on, I could definitely see where dulling that with whatever could do it, and how easy that would become. It's funny too, is I have a friend who used to be one of the really big people at Camp Chesterfield, the spiritualist camp in Indiana. And we've talked a lot about, I always leave the door open that there were people who had abilities and people who didn't, but I think there were a lot of good people. And, she pointed out to me, and rightfully so, that eventually a lot of the mediums that did physical phenomena that could cause things to happen for a couple of reasons quit doing it, because they were getting, so much hate and so much skepticism, and people were constantly dogging them, that they eventually gave up and moved into, mental mediumship rather than physical mediumship. But she also had an interesting point, which I don't know that I mentioned this in the book, but I've talked about it before. And some of the things I've written about in spiritualism is that how different the world is today. I'm like, where are all these people? I mean, why aren't there people making spirit horns fly around and musical instruments? That doesn't happen anymore. And
my spirit horn is right beside me.
Well, I know. No, and I've got a bunch of them.
But I don't make it fly around and have ectoplasm coming out of it.
Right, exactly. That became such a big part of it. Now, so my question to her was, so was this real, or was this just people trying to give the people what they wanted, to provide a show? And she said, well, and again, she mentioned that a lot of people quit doing it because of the constant criticism. But she had an interesting point too, is that stuff started to fade as time changed, as far as like the world changed and we entered a modern era, and food changed, especially, the things in our bodies changed, the way, food began to be processed, and all of these additives and preservatives and things started to come along, and water softening, and, we're not using wells anymore. We don't get our food from the farm. We get it from the grocery store, and it's all different now. things are different. Our bodies are different. The things in the air are different. It's like how they can tell if a wine that somebody says, oh, we bottled this wine in 1920, and they can test it and know that because it has radiation in it, that it came after, because it's in the air now because of all the nuclear bombs that have gone off over time, and she says that maybe that has something to do with it too, which is an interesting idea, that maybe that because of our diets and things, people don't have the same abilities they used to have. There's still that part of your brain that's there, but maybe it doesn't manifest in the same way. So I don't know. That's just
it's an interesting theory, right?
Yeah.
It's something to think about.
Yeah.
I'm going to do our station ID really quickly.
Okay. Sure.
Just that we're at the top of the hour, so I don't get in any trouble.
Right.
So if you are just joining us now, you are listening to Spirit Switchboard, and I'm your host, Carrie Lynn Shellhorn. You are listening to us on the United Public Radio Network and the UFO Paranormal Radio Network, 105.3 in the Gulf Coast and 107.7 FM in New Orleans. If you are liking what you are listening to, please consider heading to uprntalkradio.com to find out more about our hosts and shows that we have to offer. It's not all high strangeness and paranormal. There is something for everyone. Today it's a pre-record. So very excited about having Troy Taylor, American Hauntings, on the show talking about his new book, which I have in my hands, The Man from Beyond, because there's a photo in here that I wanted to talk about.
Okay. Yeah. You did say that. Yeah.
Yeah. Going off script of my list of questions, which we'll get back onto. The one photo that I find super interesting is the mysterious photo from Mick Vicker's funeral. Trying to have reproduced. Right. He had trouble.
Right. Which he never publicized. It was Joe Dunninger who publicized it after Houdini died, because he, ended up with a lot of his files and records. Bess gave them to him. They were good friends. And Joe had also done a lot of investigating and things with Houdini, and they'd known each other for a long time. And he was a fellow magician, and he was a writer. And unlike some of the other writers at the time, Houdini actually liked and respected Joe, as opposed to like Hereward Carrington, who he didn't care for at all, which is kind of funny to hear him criticize. But Joe found that in his records, and that, he had gotten this information that there was a woman who had been part of a spiritualist community in Los Angeles, I believe. And she had claimed that she was going to return at her funeral, that her ghost was going, if it was possible, she was going to do it. Well, this apparently intrigued Houdini, so he decided that he would photograph the scene, and didn't do it himself. He actually got a professional photographer, a guy from one of the movie studios that he knew, and they got all the plates. And it was funny because they went to the photo store to get the plates, and he had some random man who was there pick out the plates so that there would be no, idea that Houdini had done anything to them. He didn't handle them. He didn't do anything. And then they went to the church for the funeral, and that photograph was taken. And Houdini could never explain it. He tried to duplicate it and couldn't. And he just kind of left it as this is the one mystery that baffled Houdini. That's the way that Dunninger always kind of advertised it. And I've always thought that was so interesting. And the fact that he didn't publicize it, I kind of felt like that, he kept it under wraps because, well, he didn't want to seem stumped, again. Yeah. The ego comes back into play, and he didn't want to admit that he couldn't explain something, and because, Houdini can explain everything, that kind of thing. So, I always thought that was a really interesting story too.
Yeah, I love that it was in there because orbs are such a hot topic conversation. It's so polarizing when we start talking about orbs now. But we're going to get into that in a bit. Okay, so digging into all of the famous codes and pacts that Houdini made. So how I'd like to approach this, so that he made with Bess, his close friends, which we know that he did pass first. So based on what you uncovered, how do you personally interpret the messages from beyond that Bess may or may not have received?
Well, there were times when, she thought there might be something. Her Houdini's brother also felt the same way, that maybe there might be some sort of contact. But Houdini had always said that it would be, something grand, and after he died, of course, all these people that he had been debunking for, the last few years suddenly all claimed they were talking to him, which we know was never going to happen. But when Arthur Ford came forward, that's hard to know what happened there, because he was sincere in that he claimed to the end of his life that he did not cheat, that he didn't find the code in a book written about Houdini or a manuscript about Houdini, but he did come to Bess with what she was looking for, with the basics to the code. And it was somewhat complicated. The whole thing was pretty complicated because it was something that the code was built off something that Bess and Harry had used in his mind reading acts. And he would give her certain codes, and then the letters would mean certain things. And then when Arthur Ford comes forward and gives her Rosabelle, which was like the key to the code, and then spells out the code word, which was believe, it seemed legit, and I think that Bess was ready to give him the reward and announce that someone had made contact with Houdini, and it was some of her friends and people who knew how much she was grieving, who kind of went, you need to hold on a minute, because there might be another answer to this. And so I think that, I don't know. I don't know. And I know I've read Arthur Ford's book, but I mean, it's an autobiography. So, I mean, you can say anything you want about yourself. So I don't know how legit he was. I just don't know. So I've always found that very interesting, that he won her over, and then it was sort of like, okay, well, we're going to give it to you, but now we're going to take it away. And I always thought, he did provide the code. He swore he didn't get it from when they claimed he got it. And it's very possible. Well, the thing is, even if he had, he would have had to have worked out the code, and in more ways than were explained in that book. So I always find that interesting. But Bess then, got on to this, holding this big, the official seances, every year.
Right.
And that became a way for her to have, I mean, she wasn't broke by any means, but her income definitely had taken a hit when her husband died, because he didn't expect to die so young. And so, it wasn't like they had a big savings or anything, but he did very well for himself. So she tried several things. Nothing really worked out for her. I don't think she would really get beyond her grief. So having these official seances kind of probably filled in with what she was already doing. I think she was already trying, to reach Houdini anyway because of her grief. But, once she started to, became friends and then maybe romantically involved with Eddie Saint, who was a, carnival showman. So he really amped everything up. And then in 1936, they did that final show, which is if you've ever listened to the broadcast, it's kind of fun to listen to. You can, it's out there. You can find the old radio broadcast that was done that night. But what's not included is what happened afterward. And that's what I always like to, kind of tongue in cheek. I will say, well, there was a thunderstorm. There really was a thunderstorm, and it was very localized over the Knickerbocker Hotel. And it didn't last very long. I mean, it is California, so when it does rain, it really rains. But, that was always kind of interesting, because I always like to point out, what an ego Houdini had. And was he really going to show up and ring a bell? If Houdini was going to come on, we would all need to know about it, And so having that thunderstorm break out, I always found was, if it's a coincidence, it's kind of a fun one. It's a fun coincidence that happened, but it's a pretty wild story.
So Houdini exposed a lot of fraud, but I feel he stirred up a lot of deep questions about ethics as well too. So ethics, faith, expectations, right? Expectations and, and how we deal with grief. So what lessons do you feel his crusade holds for today's paranormal investigations and for working mediums?
Well, I think that, as far as the way that we should look at it today is going into things with an open mind. And I think that he did have that for quite some time. I think it was the anger that got the better of him that led to him trying to just expose everyone. But I always don't really see him as like a modern day skeptic. There's always that chance. There's always that hope. And I think that today, as far as being someone who's a paranormal investigator, who's looking into activity, hauntings, whatever, going in with the idea that you have an open mind, but you've got to be open to every possibility. The fact that it's not real, as opposed to it being real, and approaching it backward by saying, okay, now I need to find a natural explanation for this first. Then if I've ruled all that out, then we look and see where that goes or what becomes of it. I think we can also learn a lot of lessons about the way that we present things that we believe we found as far as evidence goes. You really have to be careful just throwing things out there and making wild claims, because you could be wrong. There's definitely someone who's out there looking to expose your mistakes. And I think that we all make mistakes. We're all humans. So you have to be careful the way that you present things. And I think that for people who are, mediums, who are also out there, presenting what they've got or their findings or their feelings and beliefs, there's always somebody out there who's looking for you to make a mistake. Just the same way it is with ghost hunting or investigating or anything. And I think that we just have to be careful the way that we present stuff and make sure that we've for ourselves ruled out anything that we could possibly do before we throw it out there and go, oh, this is absolutely real. I just think that, Houdini opened up a whole big can of worms, that we end up with people who think they're emulating him and, amazing Randy. And they're really not, because they hate everything about the paranormal. And because they don't believe in it, they're going to prove it's not real. And that's the wrong attitude to take with anything, especially when it comes to the paranormal and supernatural things that no matter how much we think we know, we really don't know, because there aren't any experts. They just don't exist, because there's just too many unanswered questions about all of it, And so, considering yourself an expert, I think, is a big mistake, because no one is an expert. So
agreed. High intention, low attachment, and still be teachable.
Yeah, exactly.
Somebody has had more experience and they can help you see and discern from a different perspective on what you may have caught. And then I guess for me, before I move on, just, extending that out a little further, how important is it, like entertainment versus data research?
Right.
And
sure.
data collection.
Sure. You definitely got to draw that line between it and say, listen, this is, you got to make sure people know if you're doing something that's meant to be entertainment, you got to make sure they know that, going into it. I do like a spirit community. It's a seance in that I do a history of spirit communication in America. We go from the very beginning to up until the modern times. And along the way, I let people participate in, table tipping, using a Ouija board, automatic writing, and then, and then we get up to like the Estes method, and that kind of thing. So they can try all of it. And then say, but this is meant to be sincere. I mean, this is how it's done. If you're just doing it as an entertainment thing, you got to make that differentiation, because people need to know that going in. Because I've got friends who will say this is a replica of a Victorian seance. We're going to do it the way that fraudulent mediums did. None of this is real. They will say that up front, but there will be people who are convinced it's absolutely real. because their tricks, they're good at what they do, and so there will always be people who still think it's real. And I think that that's where we can get into trouble. You have to make sure that people know the difference. So you're absolutely right on that.
At the same time, we can say it and say it and say it and say it, and people are hearing through their filters.
Right. Yeah.
which also
I get that a lot. I get that a lot with, somebody brought me something just recently, and I don't, I don't, looking at people's pictures sometimes, you just never know. I mean, and I've been doing that for 30 years now. And, I learned a long time ago that you just have to go, man, that is really weird. Even if it's not, because they don't really want to hear your real thoughts on it. They don't want you to know. And you go, well, here's where this is reflecting off this in the background, but that's just creating a refraction of light on your lens, and it's just my phone. Okay, but it's got a lens,
a little green dot.
Yeah, I mean, it's all those kinds of things, and they don't really want to hear that. They want you to tell them, oh my God, that's a ghost. And I've learned a long time ago that unless it's really sensational, I usually just go, yeah, that's really weird, or look, here's an outline. I've circled this outline of that appears to be a woman looking out a window. And I'm like, or it's the tree reflecting on the glass. But you just go, that's really weird. I don't know,
I tell people flat out, do not send me your photos, because I am not the one you want, because I will say that I don't see it.
I know. Well, and it's just like, I know you think your orb is the real thing, but don't send it to me, because I don't want to see it. Read my article. That's what I've got to say about orbs. I'm done. So I'm not saying that there are
cloud pictures. I get a lot of cloud pictures.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not saying there aren't light images that are paranormal. I mean, there's something we can't explain. I mean, I've seen them myself. But on the other hand, if I've got an easy explanation for the dusty basement that you're in and the 300 orbs that you have in your camera, picture that those are not ghosts. They're just not. But I'm done. I am done trying to convince people about their orbs, and everybody thinks they have the one that's going to change my mind. And, I said, I've seen a few that are really interesting and I've got my own mental criteria of what I look for if I, with that kind of thing. But for the most part, I really don't need to see it anymore.
Which brings us into the next question. When you compare Houdini's methods to modern skeptics and investigators, what stands out to you about his approach, both in terms of what he got right and where his emotions or biases may have gotten in the way?
Yeah, I think as time went on, his emotions definitely got in the way. And I think he went into investigations the way a lot of modern skeptics do, by just saying, I'm just going to prove this isn't true. And I think that his emotions got the better of him. I think when he first started doing the investigation, when he first started going to the seances, he was really looking for the real thing. And then I think he still kept that kernel of hope going for a while, before he just became angry enough that he'd had it and just started just going into it with blinders on. This can't be real. I think that's what he got to. And that's what we all have to avoid. I mean, if you're someone who is open-minded, if you call yourself a skeptic, you've got to be open-minded to everything, not shut down to everything. Prove me wrong. I'm from Missouri. Show me, that kind of, I'm tired of hearing that kind of thing. It's not up to other people to prove it to you. You need to prove it to yourself one way or the other. And so I think that, when we go into stuff like that, whether it's a seance or, an Estes method session or whatever, it's great to look for all the flaws. I get that. You definitely want to go into it thinking this might not be real, but it might be real. and I've got to weigh both sides of the coin here. I've got to look at everything that's going on. Is this something that's really happening, or is this someone who is faking it, or someone who's mistaken, who believes that this is something that it's not? And I mean, we're never going to convince like most skeptics of this, but I think that people who are paranormal investigators, which I don't even call myself that really anymore. I don't do it much like I used to, but I got tired of all the gadgets and gizmos and things, that we were using in 1996, and they're still using them, and they're doing the exact same things we were back then. And what did we learn from it? Absolutely, apparently nothing, because that's been 30 years now and we're still doing the same thing. And that still doesn't necessarily mean anything other than you might have an electrical problems in the house that you're in. Do
you find people understand the tools enough that they're using?
Yeah, that's the problem. That's the problem. People don't understand them enough. The people who do have moved on to other things. They're moving on to things that are something that is a lot tougher to explain than waving around an EMF meter that was made so that electricians could look and see if you've got faulty outlets. Okay, that you're not proving anything. That was all just a theory anyway.
As no my electrician son reminds me continuously.
Exactly. Yeah, you can't go, oh, this is a ghost detector. No, it actually isn't. We don't even know if ghosts, that was just a theory from the 90s. Maybe it's accurate. Maybe it's not. I mean, when people take something like that to a location that's abandoned, that has no power in it, no electricity, no anything, there are still problems with those things. They still pick up things. It doesn't necessarily mean, oh, there's no electricity here, it must be a ghost. Not necessarily. You could be standing on a power line, underwater water lines, just water, a magnetic area. I mean, there's so many other things that it could be. You can't jump to that conclusion. I've always pushed people for years that if one thing happens, that's cool, I guess. But if two things are happening together, or better yet, three things are happening at the same time, when you've got all this corresponding evidence at the same time, that's interesting. But it's still telling me that your EMF meter is going crazy. I'm okay, whatever, So
it still has to be in different areas, though. Like it can't be a capacitive proximeter and then have a static one beside it. Like it has to be in different ways, right?
Yeah, I used to give people a list of like, okay, so if you're going to try to record EVP in a location, then you need to have other things too, not just a recorder. You need to have the recorder set up in a stationary spot, with a EMF meter, if you want, sitting next to it, a temperature sensor sitting next to it, and you better have a camera on it all the time, because if you don't, I'm just going to assume that you're whispering into a microphone,
Exactly.
So I've got to see all of that before I'm going to take it seriously at all. You can't send me something and go, oh, listen to this. I was so-and-so. Well, okay, I could go record the exact same thing in my bathroom and send it to you and tell you that I was in the dungeon of a haunted castle, and it's just me whisper. You can't consider that evidence. You just can't, not one thing by itself. So that's why I'm all for people doing it. I love it. Love to watch it. Love to experience it. Love to go to places. Love to experience the haunted places. But if you're going to expect me to walk around with some kind of gadget, I'm not going to do it. I'm just not. That doesn't really appeal to me anymore.
The gadgets that make me laugh, I'm quite vocal about it. If it makes me laugh, here's my money.
All right. Sure. Yeah.
I bought it's just a proximity sensor as well too, but it's like the Ghostbusters car with Slimer on the top of it. I'm like, here's my money.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's fair. I have a friend who has a motion recording squirrel. It's a squirrel, and it's hilarious. It's a squirrel, and it's like, okay, that's funny, and even some of the most basic things can be very cool if used correctly. That's the thing. You want to set this stuff up, and you've got cameras on it, and they're, motion sensors, and they're in an area where there's no motion, and I'm all for it. I really am. Just not for me. Not really. I did my time. So
right.
I moved on,
Yeah. I can appreciate that too. And I feel too, when we're doing the paranormal, or talking even about seances and the experiences that may or may not be true, or what's happening, it all evolves, and we have to be open-minded to everything and anything, including ETs and cryptids, and it's all,
you gotta evolve with it. Sure. Yeah.
So
unless you're me, and then you just go, I'm old and I don't want to do that. So I just think Bigfoot is very funny and cool. And it's like, people are like, what do you think of cryptids? And I said, well, they're hilarious and they're fun and they're a blast. And I would love to chase them around in the woods. Well, you don't think they're interdimensional beings? I don't care if they are. I don't want to hear about it. If they are, maybe they are, who knows? But I'm one of those guys who has the whole idea that I have no problem believing that way out in the woods, in areas that no one goes, because I've been to places that are so remote, you wouldn't believe it. I have no problem believing that there are big, hairy leftovers from some other era wandering around the woods. I am all for it. Do I think they're, kidnapping women and impregnating them? No, not necessarily. But do I think that they could be out there? Absolutely. Do I think they rode here in a UFO? I don't really know. And I don't really want to talk about it. That's not my thing. But I get it. I understand people's attraction to all of that. It's just not mine. But I love the fact that people are pushing that forward. What's that?
Yeah. I love hearing people's opinion about it. I love, if you are passionate about it, tell me about it. I want to hear it.
Yeah.
Like, I love
unless you're going to tell me the earth is flat or that we didn't land on the moon, then I don't have any interest in talking to you. You need to be locked up somewhere. I have no interest in that. So I had a friend who put that up to me, like at my birthday party. And he's a good dude. And he always, there was alcohol involved. We'll leave it at that. And he's like, I don't know how the subject came up. And he says, well, do you think we really landed on the moon? And I'm like, yeah. And the fact that you just asked me that makes me want to end this conversation. And he goes, oh, I'm just asking questions. Do you really think that we could? I said, listen, my uncle retired as a full colonel from the Air Force. He commanded 6 different Air Force bases. He knew most of those guys personally. We landed on the moon. They were real guys. They weren't actors. They were real test pilots. These are guys he knew. So we landed on the moon. And I said, if you bring this up to me one more time, I'm never talking to you again. So it's like,
so we're not going to ask you if the moon is hollow.
Yeah. Crazy. What's that?
So we're not going to ask you if the moon is hollow.
No, that's okay. I'm gonna pass on that too. So, do I think it's a giant satellite? No. Do I? I mean, yes, it is, and it's made out of green cheese. So, just like they believed 150 years ago, we were sending ships up there to harvest cheese. So, yes, that's exactly what I think.
Don't hold back.
Yeah. Well, hey, ask my opinion, you're going to get it. So
how do you feel if Houdini could come through one of the seances? What do you feel, or what do you hope he would understand about the book that you've written about him and how you've shared his story?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know. I think that he'd like the fact that, 100 years after his death, we're still talking about him on a regular basis. I think that would be something that might appeal to him. Whether or not he would agree with me on how big I think his ego and his narcissism is, that's a good question. I've always, I'm always like, they give you those options, people, oh, hey, who's somebody from history you wish you could have dinner with, and they'll, people will come up with all different ideas. And Houdini would always be on my list. But I often wonder if I would really like him or not. I don't know.
Don't
Or
meet
if I
your
would just think he
hero,
was just
right?
so full of himself. Yeah, I wonder if he would just be so full of himself that it would just be a big turnoff. I
Mm,
don't know. It's hard to say. I mean, he did have close friends, but on the other hand, boy, that guy, really spent a lot of time getting his name in the paper. And that was his life goal, is just to be famous. He wanted to be big and he wanted to be famous and the top of his game. And he achieved it. I mean, I admire the fact that he achieved it. I mean, that's something that most people can't do.
yeah.
You don't set out with a goal like that and you don't always make it. And he did. So I don't know. I would love the chance to meet him. I
Mm,
just don't know if he would show up at one of the seances. Yeah, I think if he did manage to show up at a seance, I think he'd be, I think it was kind of cool that people were still trying to reach him after all this time,
mhm.
that his fame has continued after all these years. I mean, because again, we're going back to the very beginning of our interview, ask people to name magicians, and people might say Chris Angel or David Blaine, or why do you think you know those names? You know those names because of Houdini. He
Yeah.
wasn't the first magician. He certainly wasn't the last. He'll even admit that he wasn't a great magician. As far as magic tricks, that really
Right.
wasn't his thing. Illusions were his thing. The
Yeah.
escapes were his thing. He was a great escape artist, great illusionist, not a great magician. So it's one of those things where but if you ask somebody to name a magician, he's always going to be the first one that comes up. So maybe, I don't know, maybe his ego served him well.
Yeah.
In
I think it
hindsight.
did. Yeah.
Yeah,
There-
absolutely. So
There's so much in this book. Like it's which I appreciate.
yeah,
And I buy people's books because I love them and want to support all the folks that I
sure.
admire. But I write in them, I circle, I highlight, I put notes.
Oh yeah.
So I don't lend them. I don't borrow from other people
Right.
because
No, I
there's so
don't
much.
either. Yeah.
But do you think
Yeah.
there's still room for more? Is there still research happening to find more? Not that there has to be another book because you just birthed this
Oh yeah,
baby,
yeah.
which is a lot. But
Yeah.
is there still more of the story to tell?
Oh, I'm positive there is, because I run across niche research into Houdini, and by that I mean just certain aspects of things that he did. I mean, I've seen entire books about the hearings that he attended in Congress about the stopping the fortune telling law in D.C. I've seen entire books based on that. I've seen books based on the whole idea that Gordon, the Whitelaw, the guy who allegedly punched him in the stomach, and all that. There's a big conspiracy about whether he was hired by spiritualists and all kinds of stuff. I mean, I've seen all kinds of research. Yeah. And he was a very odd character. I mean,
Yeah.
and I touch on that some in the book. Dude really came out of nowhere and was a really odd person. And so, I think that probably fueled some of the conspiracy theories. So, yeah, I mean, I do think there's still more that can be done about Houdini. And there's definitely more research that can be done about spiritualism in that era. Starting with World War I and continuing through the 1920s. I mean, we barely scratched the surface on how many mediums there were at the time. Just like when you go further back and you go to the 1850s, there were a lot, and then things started to kind of die out, but then the Civil War brought it all back. And the popularity surged again. And you can go all the way back to, the Lincolns, and Mary's interest in spiritualism and Abraham's interest in spiritualism and the odd things that were part of his existence and the beliefs that he had. So, you can see spiritualism go up and down. Now, the question, though, is, without writing about Houdini, who has this lasting fame, do people really buy a lot of books about spiritualism these days? Because a lot of people see it as this old dusty thing that, nobody believes in that kind of stuff anymore. They don't understand the way it shaped everything that we do.
Everything.
When you talk about the paranormal community, paranormal interest interest in the supernatural, ghosts, and everything that we have an interest in America and probably Canada as well, comes from spiritualism. I mean, if it didn't, we wouldn't have Ouija boards if spiritualism didn't exist. We wouldn't have any of these things. So it is the basis for everything we do. But sometimes it's like pulling teeth to get people to understand this stuff, because they all think that, the paranormal interest in the paranormal began in the early 2000s when ghost hunters went on the air.
I know.
It's just like, what? They don't even know there's this long, deep history behind all this stuff, So Houdini has become sort of our poster child for getting people to understand that there is a history behind all this stuff, that it is part of, what created what we know of as the paranormal today. So that's always like an ongoing thing for me. It's a lot of work for me just because I love the history of all of it. I love the history behind anything I do. And that's what really draws me to all of it. And, writing about and presenting about spiritualism, I swear to God, sometimes I can literally watch people's eyes glaze over as soon as you start talking about seances. They don't get it. They don't understand how important it is, So
Agreed.
I don't know.
I'm with
you.
We'll
see. We'll see where it goes from there. Yeah,
I will stand on the soapbox with you because I'm grateful to them. I am grateful for the foundation that they laid for me to do what I do, because I wouldn't be able to. And I mean, I've been able to connect since the time that I was little, but to do this as a career, I am grateful to them for laying that foundation for me. And I make sure I include that history in everything that I do to educate people and why it's important.
And it's also good that we're starting to see we are starting to see a bit of a resurgence in people looking back at that. I especially have noticed it more recently with people acknowledging how important as I mentioned early on, the contribution of all the women that were involved in it, who've largely been forgotten, and so now people are finally starting to open back up to that. Some of the women who were involved in that early research, I mean, not even to mention the spirit mediums, which were mostly women, as we talked about it early on, this was a career for people who didn't have one. But there were also a lot of women involved in that early research too. And they've been forgotten, in favor of the men who were involved because it was the time period. Now we're starting to bring all that back too. And I think that's a good hook also, like using Houdini as a hook to get people interested in spiritualism. I think pointing out the feminine side, the women empowerment behind it is another good way to get people to understand just how important this thing was. Not just for the paranormal community, but in American history, how important spiritualism was. It was such a big part of the 19th century and early 20th century. And we ignore all that because our attention is being taken away by all the nonsense that's going on now, with politics and all kinds of stuff and constant distractions and things. We don't look at our history as much as we should, because all of these things we deal with now, we've already dealt with. We just need to look at how we dealt with them before so that we can get rid of these things now, because we got rid of them once. So let's get rid of them again, And I think that looking back and using spiritualism in this case, looking back is a good way to get people to do it. So
I agree. And it's, when you talk about Abraham Lincoln, and that's a big passion for me too, in the spiritualism aspect of it. But for my mom, it's been a common ground between my mother and I having these conversations, because my mom did this deep dive into genealogy, because that's what you do when you get over 70. And so and so she's mapped out this family tree and gone back all this, and apparently we're related. I forget which kind of grandfather times whatever he is for us.
Yeah.
But he is.
Yeah. Well, that's cool
so
though.
then
Yeah.
once I started telling my mom, I'm like, hey, so did you know?
Yeah. Did you know? Yeah. Lincoln believed in a lot of really strange things that most people don't know about. And he was a regular attendee at seances in the White House. So, you know,
so look where my heritage comes from.
There you go. There you go.
We had this great conversation, her and I, about spiritualism and Abraham Lincoln. And then she was a little more fascinated about that aspect of seances, because seances, you say the word seance and it can be polarizing for people. They are scared of Ouija boards. They're scared of trance channeling. They're scared of all of these things. And it was
they've been fed this line of, you know, how evil and harmful and demons are going to get you and all this stuff. And again, it gets back to one of the other things that we talked about. That's how stuff gets spiced up. People use that kind of stuff, you know, to get attention, you know, just like the satanic panic of the 80s and 90s. That was when I grew up, you know, and you couldn't like heavy metal. You couldn't like this or that, you know, because it was satanic. And yeah, it was all just ways for these people to get attention, you know, and it was a way to promote their own careers. And it's, you know, the same thing with Houdini going around saying, oh, you know, I'm going to prove these are all fake. There aren't any ghosts out there. He probably didn't really believe it any more than these people believe that, you know, you would become possessed because you used a Ouija board. But yet that stuff's still around. And we get people like, I'll get people who come in my museum. We've got a big case that's filled with antique Ouija boards. They're just cool. You know, they're really cool. And they're afraid to even go near the case. You know, oh no, I'm not even going to go over there. And I'm like, are you nuts? You know,
pull it out on an investigation and everybody freaks out.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Perfect example. So it's funny though, when we do the seances and I'm walking through, you know, all this spirit communication history. And then I start talking about Ouija boards but you know, I may not get anybody that really wants to participate in like table tipping or automatic writing, but boy, you whip that Ouija board out. I got all kinds of volunteers, you know, even though if you ask them to do it at home, they wouldn't do it would never do it. But asking them to do it in a situation like that, oh yeah, sure. Why not? You know, so.
Yeah.
Funny.
So speaking of the museum, by the time this airs, I know that the move will have already taken place.
I will be, as this airs, I will probably be in the museum trying to get everything ready to reopen. I mean, literally at the time it's airing. Because I foresee that's going to be quite a job over the holidays, but it gives me a lot of excuses to not go to stuff though. I'm so sorry I can't make it. I'm gonna have to work on the museum, so sorry. You know,
so where is it moving to? Is it still?
We're only moving about 4 blocks, but we're moving from a place called the Mineral Springs Hotel, which is I've been there for I guess about 12 years or so in the building doing stuff. I've had the museum for a couple of years, but we're moving to the downtown part of Alton, down like where the riverboat landings used to be and stuff. So I'm moving into a former department store, also haunted, long history of being haunted, which is kind of cool too. So it's not a big move as far as distance. It's just all the stuff. It's a lot of stuff to move. So, and I don't like the packing part, but I love the unpacking part. I love to, like when I moving my house, I have as you might imagine, I have a lot of books, which makes movers very unhappy because I don't do that myself anymore. I'm way past that. I'm not doing that.
Right.
But I love to unpack them and arrange them and organize them. And so this will be like, you know, I get to unpack the museum and rearrange and reorganize everything, which will be fun. The moving part, no, but once it's there, I'll be happy.
Like a winter move is never fun either.
No, it really isn't, because no matter how much you want the weather to cooperate, and I've lost track of how many times I've moved in the winter, but it's the off season for me. So it's my chance to do it. And so I'm usually, you know, that's a good time for me to move. But it's terrible. The weather is awful and it's too cold and I don't like it, but it's the way it goes. you know.
So what else is coming up? Projects that you'd like to promote, things that are...
Oh, sure. Yeah. Let's see. Well, by the time when this airs, we'll be about a week and a half or so away from when our tickets go on sale for the Haunted America Conference. And the Haunted America Conference, we're in our 29th year. We were the first ghost conference in the country, first one that ever happened. So we've been doing it ever since. We only missed it 1 year, and you can guess what year that was, 2020. So that's why we're at 29, not 30. But I stayed with the count. But we've got speakers. We get speakers from all over the country. We do tours, we do ghost hunts, we do events, workshops, all kinds of things. And we normally we hold it in the middle of the country, so it's kind of accessible, but we get people from everywhere. California, New York, Pennsylvania, Florida, people come from everywhere to attend. And a lot of times it's, we'll have probably, I'm guesstimating again, but normally we have about 500 people who come. So it's not a convention, it's an actual conference. So it's based around the speakers. It's not based around, just people wandering around signing autographs and things. So, so it's a strict schedule kind of deal. And so we'll get about 500 people. And I would say, out of that 500, at least half of those come every year. And it's like summer camp, community. And that will be like the only time we see our friends from wherever will be at the conference. And it goes very fast, but it's a lot of fun. And, we've got a good town for it. Alton is an old historic town. It's one of the most haunted small towns in America. I mean, we have lots and lots of ghost stories. There are lots of things to do here outside of ghost stuff, but we really lean heavily into that ghostly tourism here. So it's a lot of fun, but the tickets go on sale the 12th. So that'll be what'll be coming up right after this airs. That'll be our next big thing. So we also do then in February, we do a big food drive every year for food banks in the area. And it's a free event. You just have to bring canned goods and food items and things. And then we'll gather a bunch of, we'll get speakers and storytellers and things from around the area. And we do like a all day event, and then we'll do some after hour stuff, but it's a lot of fun, and it gives people a chance to get together and do something. And, we usually end up like a couple of truckloads of food. People the ghost people are super generous, and they will bring an ungodly amount of stuff. I mean, but people bring, you only have to bring one thing. That's the limit, but people that bring boxes and boxes of stuff, socks and toilet paper and all kinds of food items and things. And it's really great. So then we donate it all to the food banks and, plan it again for next year. So it's a lot of fun.
I love it. I appreciate you.
It's fun to get stuff that we get to do, and and it's nice to get to do things back for people,
for sure.
Because we have a lot of fun with this, and it's my day job, and it's not always easy. You don't always know where the next meal's coming from sometimes, but normally just the next big thing. But it's a lot of fun to get to do it, and I never take that for granted. So
yeah, well, thank you for being here. Sure. It was great sharing
fun to do
time, space, energy, and passion for Houdini and spiritualism with someone who has the same enthusiasm for the conversation. So I appreciate you. So American Haunting Ink, is that correct? American Hauntings Ink.
American Hauntings Ink with a K at the end. That's a kind of or you could even go to AmericanHauntings.net. That's also takes you to the same place. And that website's sort of like a clearinghouse to go everywhere else, because I have multiple websites. So different things you can go to different areas from there. But that's where I always send everybody. So people can check that out. They can find the book there. They can find all my books linked from there. So it's a lot of fun. So
super. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you.
So, I'm just going to do a shout out to all our listeners. Thank you so much for being here. You have been listening to Spirit Switchboard. I'm your host, Carrie Lynn Shellhorn, and you have been listening to us live on the United Public Radio Network and the UFO Paranormal Radio Network, 105.3 in the Gulf Coast and 107.7 FM in New Orleans. When I see you guys all back here next week, it'll be January 2nd. So I hope that everybody has a safe, happy, and fun new year, and I will see you in 2026. Good night, everybody.
Thank you.